Welcome back to our podcast journey together. In the first episode, we dove into a powerful channeled teaching that explored the nature of consciousness and its relationship to reality and manifestation. This profound perspective really resonated with me, so I wanted to dedicate our second episode to going deeper into the nature of consciousness itself. There are so many perspectives on consciousness from different philosophies, spiritual traditions, and scientific disciplines. My aim today is to share some of these viewpoints and reflect on what it means to recognize consciousness as the fundamental ground of being that gives rise to all that we experience. I hope these ideas stir your own realizations and give you new lenses to contemplate yourself and the world. Let's dive in. Defining consciousness. So what do we really mean when we use the term consciousness? In everyday language, we tend to equate it with simply being awake or aware. However, many contemplatives and philosophers throughout history have pointed to consciousness being something much more profound. Some describe it as a boundless capacity for experience, pure undifferentiated awareness, or the simple experience of being. Modern psychologists examine human consciousness as our subjective experience of the world, made up of sensations, thoughts, emotions, and perceptions. Some neuroscientists have defined levels of consciousness connected to brain activity, but many spiritual traditions go even further. They suggest consciousness as a fundamental ground of being from which everything arises, the source of all manifestation. This view sees consciousness as eternal, beyond any physical form. Consciousness and reality. This leads us to the perspective shared in the original teaching that all manifest reality arises within consciousness. All that we perceive through our senses, all phenomena, are temporary forms taken within the eternal ground of consciousness. Consciousness manifests as the myriad forms we experience, yet it remains untouched and unchanging. Some traditions use analogies like the ocean and waves. Consciousness as the ocean, and individual beings and things as waves forming temporarily on the surface, with their essential nature still being the ocean. Or a piece of gold that is molded into different shapes, yet remains gold in its essence. This points to the dreamlike, magical nature of our perceived reality. The world of forms arises within consciousness, has no independent or permanent existence outside of it, and ultimately dissolves back into consciousness. The relationship between consciousness and form. So what is the relationship between consciousness and the manifestations that appear within it? One perspective is that all forms are simply consciousness vibrating at different frequencies. We can think of it as consciousness condensing and taking on shapes through our senses before returning to its natural state. This leads to the understanding that all phenomena in our reality are actually empty and interdependent. They are empty because they have no enduring essence outside of consciousness. And they are interdependent because nothing exists independently. Everything relies on everything else to manifest form. But the only constant is the awareness in which they appear. The creative power of consciousness. If consciousness is the ground out of which everything arises, that means it has infinite creative potential. All that is expressed through the forms we experience emerges from and returns to that field of possibilities within consciousness. As human beings, when we tap into this deeper realm of our being, we begin to glimpse our own creative power to manifest and shape reality. Rather than being subject to creation, we become conscious co-creators ourselves. This points to our highest nature and capability as human beings. The boundless and eternal nature of consciousness. When we start to recognize the true nature of consciousness, we realize that it is beyond any limits, concepts, or characteristics. Some describe it as infinite, boundless, eternal, completely free and untouched by anything that appears within it. Consciousness has no specific location or form. It pervades everywhere and everything. It is beyond our conventional notions of space, time, and causality. From the perspective of consciousness, past, present, and future disappear into the timeless now. Consciousness is simply a vast, contentless awareness, the fundamental ground of existence. Implications for spiritual growth. What are the implications of this perspective for our own spiritual growth? When we begin to shift our self-identity away from the body and mind to the vast ground of pure consciousness that we are, we experience life in a very different way. No longer limited by old patterns and conditioning, we have wisdom and creative power available. We become more fully present and aligned with the purpose of being expressions of love and service for all. This understanding needs to be not just intellectual, but fully realized and embodied within us. There is always more depth and nuance to uncover as we consciously evolve. Key takeaways and reflections. In this exploration today, we've touched on different facets of consciousness and its relationship to everything we experience. To summarize, consciousness is the fundamental ground of being, the eternal source from which everything arises, utterly boundless beyond concepts and characteristics. All manifest forms within the universe are temporary expressions of consciousness. When we align with this understanding, we begin to tap into our deeper nature and new potentials for creation and service. I'd love to hear your reflections and any insights you gained from this perspective and discussion. What most resonated with you or sparked new questions to explore? Please reach out and share. That's all for this episode. Thank you for journeying with me.